Hello, testing. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Johanna Bergen, and I'm a volunteer with Decorah Power, and I'm excited that we have this opportunity to offer this educational event to y'all tonight. I'll talk just a little bit about Decorah Power's efforts and invite and encourage you to join me in voting yes on the March 4th referendum. And then pass over to Dave Berg for a presentation tonight. Great content. We'll roll through that content and then have a good chunk of time for questions and answers. So as you're listening, I encourage you to think about the questions you'd like to pose in the room. Just a reminder, our goal tonight is to get more information into the hands of the community. So ask questions that, not only satisfy your curiosity, but help everyone else in the room, and this is recorded so others to learn from as well. I think that's the flow for tonight. All right. So Decorah Power is a group of volunteers, citizens here in Decorah, and we are interested in supporting the City Council's efforts to explore a municipal electric utility. So first, a big thank you to our City Council for calling this referendum. We all know that this is the second time around. This is a community that's well educated in all things electric utility provider, which I'm sort of proud of. And then we know that calling the question is just the first step, right? The next step is helping you all understand what opportunities are in front of us with a yes vote on March 4th. And that's really what drives us as volunteers, is opportunity. What could the future of Decorah look like with some potential rate relief for our citizens? What could the future look like through additional grant and funding opportunities as a municipal electric utility, even if that stays on paper for the decades to come? And then what could the opportunities be for Decorah if we had an MEU? And we've been inspired by the stories of other cities in Iowa who have MEUs and what that has allowed for their communities. Some of you were with us last week as .com talked to us about those opportunities in Ames, and there are many other examples. So thank you all for coming. I hope you learned something this evening, that you walk away a little bit more educated on this issue, and I'd encourage you all to join me in voting yes. You can vote early, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 at the Winnebago County Courthouse, starting right now. Maybe some of you have, or join us on March 4th on Election Day. All right. I would love to introduce Dave Berg of Dave Berg Consulting. I met Dave, I was just reminding him of this as he came in, when I was sitting on City Council in 2018, and Dave was presenting in Decorah. And at that point, I felt like a deer in the headlight with my eyes wide open, saying, all these numbers, what do they mean? And I was grateful then for the explanations and the information Dave provided, and I'm grateful that we have an opportunity to have a similar discussion today. So Dave, you know Decorah from the past few years, and you know energy and electricity and rates from decades. Thank you for being here tonight, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Luana. So yes, I'm Dave Berg. I am a one-person firm, Dave Berg Consulting. Sort of my unofficial title is I'm the rate guy. So my expertise is in rates and how they're calculated, and a lot of financial feasibility with regard to utilities. And I work with electric, natural gas, water, and wastewater utilities. And I've actually been doing this for over 40 years now. And as was mentioned, I was involved back in 2018 as part of that last municipalization effort. And actually I'm going to talk tonight about some of what happened and some of the things that you heard back then, and then additionally some of what you're hearing about today, particularly really what you're hearing from Alliant from a numbers perspective. And I want to make some comments about some of the things that you probably have heard or read relative to numbers. And in the utility world, and particularly in the rate world, the numbers are a really big deal. And I've also been involved in several rate cases at the Iowa Utilities Commission. intervening in some cases with clients, and it can be a very confusing kind of topic if you're not living in this world the way that I am. I mean, I have family, and I know that my family, they don't, sort of understand or quite frankly care about these things. But they are important, in particular, given the question that again is being asked to the citizens of Decorah relative to the vote for the potential of moving forward with a new municipal-owned utility. So, looking back a little bit at the timeline, so back in 2017, so this was right before we moved forward with the last municipalization effort, Alliant filed for an 11.6% rate increase, and then actually the Iowa Commission approved a 7.4%. Now that approval actually came right about the time that we had the vote last time, because it was a filed in 2017, but the ultimate decision wasn't made until early in 18. In January of 2018, and I was involved in this, we and another firm that I was working with put together the feasibility study around the potential for a new municipal utility here in Decorah. Then in February of that year, Alliant issued a report, and another engineering or consulting firm, Concentric, actually did the report for Alliant at that time, and they made presentations then to the Decorah City Council on February 8th of 2018, and I was actually there and also did a presentation that same evening. I also did a series of public meetings leading up to the report, and a lot of folks came to those, and I think that there was a lot of really good information. And that, of course, as so many of you know, is that the vote happened in May of 2018, and it didn't pass by 3 votes. And oftentimes in elections we hear about how every vote counts, but then elections are decided by thousands or millions of votes, and you might wonder, well, does my vote count? Well, let me tell you what, when a vote either fails or passes by 3, every vote counts. I can still remember I was actually driving in northern Minnesota and got the phone call about the vote from one of the people down here, and really I actually had to pull over, because to me it was really something that it was that close, and of course I was disappointed ultimately that it also failed. Now, as we sort of continue down the timeline, now remember, so there was a request for 11%, and they got about 7.5% in that 2017 rate case. Well, then in 2019, they filed for an additional 11.9% increase and got 7.4%. Then in 2023, Alliant filed for a 16% rate increase, and they got 10.5%. So when you look at those 3 rate filings by Alliant in 17, 19, and 23, they filed for a combined 44.8% increase. And if you do that on an annualized basis, that's a 6.4% annual increase if they had gotten everything that they asked for. Now, the commission ultimately, and this isn't unusual, that most rate cases, utilities don't get everything they ask for. It's kind of like with your parents when you're a kid, you always ask for a little more than you need, because then they feel better when they don't give you what you want. But ultimately they were approved 27.5% totality over those 3 rate cases, which is an average of 4.1% per year. I might come back to this slide. These numbers are actually important relative to not only what we heard in 2018, but I think also what you're continuing to hear today. So obviously there's another vote now scheduled for Tuesday, March 4th. Concentric has now issued a new feasibility report. So they did a feasibility report back in 2018, and had those results. And if you go to Alliant's website, you can find a copy of that report. And obviously now here I am tonight relative to another information meeting. I actually haven't spoken to him, but I understand my friend Don Com was here last week and spoke. I've actually known Don for like 35 years. When I first knew him, he worked for Northern States Power in the Twin Cities area, which actually is where I am from. I live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. Now, from the new study from Concentric, all right, and this I took this from the Alliant website. So what they show here, and this is a graph from their report. Now, this dark line, which is the top line, this heavy dashed line, this was the forecast that Concentric had in their feasibility report in 2018 relative to Alliance rates. Now, I'm extrapolating the numbers from the graph, so if it's not exactly right, that's all I got. But basically what it was showing that was in 2018 their forecast of 2017 through 2023, and they included a little bit of a bump on an assumption in that relative to that 2017 rate filing by Alliant. Like I said, at the time in early 2018, that hadn't been decided yet, but there was an assumption in their report. They basically were showing rates for Decorah, okay, going from 12 cents to 13, which is an average increase of 1.3% per year. All right, this is what they were forecasting in early 2018, and it included, right, the 11.6% that they had requested. Now they said in their report back then, well, we don't think that Alliant will get all of it, they never do, and they had some assumption, but even with the assumed increase, they didn't know about the 7.4 yet, they were saying rates through basically 2 years ago, we're going to go up by 1.3%. Actual rates, what they're showing now is they're updating, okay? So according to their current report, they say that the actual rates for 17 through 23 went from about 11 cents to 12.5 cents, which is 2.1% per year. This is their current look back at what they're saying actually happened. But as I just mentioned, the commission approved increases for Alliant for that exact same period, which averaged 4.1% per year. So even their look back and what they're saying actually happened doesn't match what, quite frankly, I think actually happened by going and looking at the rate cases. So the 2.1 that they're showing is historical, doesn't match the 4.1, which is I think the actual historical. So you can't, history is what it is. Projections are projections, right? But history is what it is. Now, coming out of that, they had another rate filing in 2019. I participated as an expert witness in that case for some local interveners against Alliant. We believe that as part of that municipalization, that 1.3% forecast by Concentric wasn't accurate, and Alliant, quite frankly, knew that. Those meetings when Concentric was giving those predictions, there was Alliant senior management in the room, some of which were actually witnesses for Alliant in that later rate case. Now, I give a lot of presentations, and one of the rules of presentations is you don't have slides like this with lots of words on it. And I'm actually going to read this because I think this is really, really important. This is directly from the Iowa Utility Commission final order in the Alliant 2019 rate case. This is the commission's view looking back at what Alliant had said during the municipalization effort in Decorah. And it says, and remember, this is from the Iowa Utilities Commission. This isn't an editorial in a local newspaper. This isn't from somebody from the Decorah Power Group. This is from the Iowa Utilities Commission, and this isn't even what the rate case was about, right? The rate case was about an Alliant rate increase. This was a side issue that I was surprised the commission even worried about it. Here's what they said. It may never be known whether Decorah would have been better served by IPL, which is Alliant, or a municipal electric utility. But given Decorah's loss in the municipalization election by only 3 votes, the outcome of the election most certainly would have been different if IPL had corrected CEA, that's Concentric, that's who issued the feasibility report last time and again this time. If IPL had corrected CEA's representation regarding IPL's plans for future rate case proceedings, the actions taken by IPL in opposition to the Decorah municipalization demonstrates a lack of management efficiency by not providing accurate information to the citizens of Decorah about anticipated rate increases. While a rate-regulated electric utility is a monopoly in its service territory, it has a corresponding duty to provide accurate and timely information to customers and communities in that service territory. The evidence in this case shows that IPL did not fulfill this responsibility, and this is evidence of a failure of management efficiency. And then it goes on to say, in addition to IPL's shortcomings in Decorah, evidence in this docket regarding IPL's numerous customer complaints, including complaints regarding AMI rollout, and IPL's declining customer satisfaction evaluation supports a finding that IPL has not managed well its customer relations, particularly when it comes to new technology. I have read a lot of state commission rulings in my 40 years in this business. This was stunning, right? This was absolutely a stunning rebuke, in my opinion, of IPL/Alliant and their behavior in the last municipalization effort locally here.
What's AMI?
Oh, automated metering infrastructure, smart meters. So, when we look at the Alliant Decorah municipalization website, one of the things that I really found interesting is that they have an article called "The Folly of Municipalizing Utilities." Certainly a negative sounding title, wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
It was published actually in Forbes back in October of 2019, so it's not specifically about Decorah. This is, Forbes magazine, national publication. Oh, look, in the article it references a study by Concentric. And if you can imagine, they were not big fans of municipalization of utilities in this article. This is a quote from the article, which I also find to be a rather stunning quote as somebody who's worked in the industry as long as I have. Put broadly, the main economic lesson the 20th century taught us is that governments are not particularly adept at providing goods or services, and in most cases, assigning them this task eventually becomes an unmitigated disaster. Wow. Okay, now, you know what? I'm an engineer and I'm a pretty darn conservative person. And I will attest to the fact that in many cases I believe the government doesn't do a good job of doing things. The problem here is, and I have worked with literally hundreds of municipally owned utilities, to call them a government entity is a misnomer, okay? What they are is they are utilities that are owned by a city, right? There's also co-ops, right, which are owned by the members of the co-op. But they are very, very different than the IRS or the Social Security Administration or the Department of Education. They are professional organizations doing a professional job, manned by people who are professionals in their industry, okay? The government piece, and let me rephrase that, the local government piece of a municipal electric utility is the regulation of it. Guess what? Alliant is also regulated by a government entity. It's called the Iowa Utilities Commission, right? So the difference is that with a municipal utility, a lot of the regulation is done at the local level, which the citizens of the community, in my opinion, have more of an opportunity to have an impact on that regulation. That it's being done at a local level by people that you know, and by people that you can approach, and people that you can talk to. So I think it's an incredibly unfair depiction of municipal utilities to call them a government entity. They are not run by some unknown horde of bureaucrats who are appointed and don't know what they're doing, all right? Like I mentioned, my friend Don Com, who was here last week, who manages the Ames municipal utility, started out his career, well, I don't know if that was a start, but when I first met him, he worked for Northern States Power, an investor-owned utility. Don is a professional utility engineer. He is not a bureaucrat. He is not a government guy. I think the more than 750 municipal electric, broadband, oh, I mentioned electric twice, sorry about that typo, gas and water utilities in Iowa would really disagree with that statement. The article also specifically focuses on California. All right, bringing up in the article Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Jose. Now, Los Angeles actually has a municipal utility. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I've actually worked for them in the past. They're the largest municipally owned utility in the country. There's nothing wrong with how they are operated any differently than if you look in California at Pacific Gas and Electric or Southern Cal Edison or any of the other utilities that are in California. The article actually made reference to one fire one time in the past as an example of how horrendous LADWP is operated. Now, California is a whole different animal in so many different ways. Now, and both, San Francisco and San Jose have been talking about municipalizing. Okay, actually San Francisco's been talking about it for a long time. That has no bearing on Decorah. In this article, this folly of municipalizing utilities, it specifically, really talks about, LA, San Francisco, San Jose. I'm guessing that the vast majority of Decorah citizens would not agree that you're anything like Los Angeles or San Francisco or San Jose. And so, they put this article there, and like I said, wow, our friends from Concentric were again, were the basis for this entire article. And I think it's a disservice, and it has absolutely no basis in reality for what's going on in Decorah. So, now, looking at the new Concentric rate forecast. All right, they've updated their feasibility study, right? Now, I'm an engineer, I'm a numbers guy. I found this very interesting. Let's go back. All right, this was an update early in the report, remember? And I said that they showed that the actual rates between 2020 or 17 and 2023 went up by 2.1%. This is early in the report. Apparently history changed as we move later in the report, because now this is the graph. This is history. All right? This is, top line is the total rate in Decorah, which now appears to go from 11 cents to 14 cents over the exact same historical period as was in the early graph, which is now 4.1% per year. Almost double. And you would think, okay, last time the Iowa Utilities Commission in that 2019 rate case kind of took Alliant and Concentric out to the woodshed, right? Relative to those statements that I read. So I'm thinking, all right, well, this time they're going to sort of keep their eye on the ball, and maybe it's going to make some more sense. And if you look at the graph, you go, well, yeah, they've got a fairly significant increase on that top line. So maybe, they're being a little bit more forthright. But again, when you look at this is from 2024 to 2048. So that's a long forecast. Rate forecasts that go out 24 years are funny. But, all right, it goes up 79%, that seems like a lot. It's only 2.5% per year. So, Alliant, who has a history of significantly larger rate increases than that, at least what they certainly have asked for, and even what they have been awarded by the commission, is probably going to have, according to Concentric, the best series of rate increases relative to being as low as possible in the country. I'm actually speaking at a conference tomorrow about all of the challenges that our industry has from a rate perspective because of all of the investments that we need to make. I don't think anybody's going to pull this off over the next 24 years. So based on what they said last time and what the reality was last time, I guess I'll leave it to you to decide if you think this is a more accurate depiction of the future based on their latest study. So what happens if the vote passes? One of the interesting things about this is that if the vote passes, that doesn't mean on the day after the election that you have a municipal utility. I'm actually also working with a small community in Minnesota, Slayton, Minnesota. They had a vote last year. They want to supplant Xcel Energy, the big investor and utility in Minnesota, with a municipal, and the vote passed. We're not there yet, though. There is a process, right? And so we're in that process, and we're going to be, most likely going through a hearing at the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, just like here. Ultimately, you have to go before the Iowa Utilities Commission. So one of the things that you then would start proceedings at the Iowa Utilities Commission. I think what's important is that when you look at the Concentric report, they might say we're being transparent. Here's all of our numbers. But you don't know what's behind those numbers. All you know is that those are the numbers that they put on the paper. In my experience, their numbers are crazy high and not realistic. Well, one of the things is when you go before the Iowa Utilities Commission to try to take this to the next step to ultimately forming a municipal utility, you get to do a data request, all right? And the commission is making sure that you're getting true, transparent information relative to deciding things like what should the acquisition price be, and a lot of the other things that they include in their report. The city may authorize an update of the study that we did back in 2018. They haven't done that yet, but that might be something that they would do. And actually, you really would need to do that because that would also have to be part of the process before the commission. At the commission, it becomes almost like a trial. The local community will have their idea of what should happen. Alliant will have their idea of what should happen. There are experts involved. There are legal involved. It's a process that you go through. The interesting thing is that the city can withdraw your petition at any time. If the Iowa Utility Commission gives you a bad result that the city doesn't believe that they can make it happen, you can say never mind. So voting yes doesn't say that absolutely positively, no matter what happens, even if it's the worst case scenario as contained in the concentric report, that the city still has to do it, right? A no vote means you'll never know. You won't get through the process. You won't be able to sort of peel back the onion on the data and the statements that Alliant and Concentric are making. I work predominantly with municipal utilities, so it's not a surprise that I'm up here saying good things about municipal utilities. I've worked for hundreds of them all over the country. And I love working with them. I love the people. They are very professional. They do a good job. In general, across the country, what you see is higher reliability, lower rates, more better customer service. I mean, that plays out all the time. You know, I'm a rate guy, and I do a lot of work in Minnesota and Iowa in particular. There's a lot of my client base that's here. I can tell you in the state of Iowa, my clients love it if I do a rate comparison to Alliant. Their rates are other than maybe a few outliers, they are by far the highest in Iowa. Much higher than Mid-American, the other investor-owned utility in the western part of the state. I suppose they have their reasons why they are, but, you know, their rates are as high as anybody's rates that you're going to encounter in the state. With that, I would be happy to entertain any questions. Yeah.
Who's the Iowa,
Who are the members, the three?
The Iowa, you know, I do not know, I mean, I've actually testified before them. I can't remember the names of the folks who are on the commission, but yes, there are 3 members of the Iowa Utilities Commission. Every state has some sort of a commission or regulatory board.
I think the underlying question is, given the political situation of today, what is your sense that we're gonna spend a lot of money and get a no?
Well, you most likely won't get a yes or a no, but you'll probably get is an answer about how much they believe you need to pay Alliant relative to doing this. And then it would become ultimately an affordability issue. I have a horrible track record of predicting how state utility commissions and boards decide things. That's just a reality. So I can't really make a guess on, I mean, I think that we would have a compelling story to tell, and that they would be reasonable. You know, when you look, they haven't given Alliant everything that they asked for in their rate cases, and they typically don't. You know, is there politics? Well, there's politics in everything. I have no idea what the politics of those 3 members may be, and how if they may have any kind of personal feelings about this whole effort.
So then I guess if I may follow up, first of all, thank you for your presentation, very well done. If I may follow up, what's the money that Decorah is gonna be out for before we get to their decision? That's the question. Are we wasting a lot of money for a futile effort?
Well, you know, wasting money is sort of in the eye of the beholder. If it's for naught, you might say, you know, that was a waste. Honestly, I can't give a number that I would be comfortable saying I would know that would be the number. Is it gonna be cheap? Well, no. You know, experts and attorneys, you know, cost money, and it's a fairly big effort. But, you know, what's interesting, you know, sort of going back to the concept about government, you know, one of the things, and I've heard this before in other places where this is looked at, and one of the things that they will say is, well, you don't want your property taxes going up because of a utility. All right, I've worked with hundreds of municipal utilities. I've never once seen money flow from property taxes to the utility. And in fact, it flows the other way. All right, the vast majority of municipal utilities make a contribution to the, sometimes it's called a payment in lieu of taxes, just like Alliant pays a franchise fee. And Alliant, you know, they may be saying, well, that franchise fee is going away, the city will be out money. Well, but then this municipal utility can make a contribution. I know that Don probably talked about what the Ames utility gives, you know, as a contribution to the city of Ames last week when he was here. And so, you know, sometimes you get information that isn't accurate. Other questions? Yes?
My question is jumping ahead. If this goes forward and we do have a municipal utility, what, apparently we would be getting it from Alliant. It's equipment and things that Alliant now runs, and there is some perimeter or what's the shape of it? Can you help me see what that
Yes.
might be?
Well, one of the things is in the way that utilities are run, utilities have what's called monopoly service. So they have defined service territories. You know, right now you cannot, by living where you live in Decorah, you can't get your electric service from somebody else. You can only get it from Alliant. And then it's called the regulatory compact is what it's referred to. And what it means is that a utility that serves an area has to provide service to everybody in that area who wants service. Now, because there's not competition, that's why we have regulation relative to rates. And that's why there's these arguments about how much money should Alliant make, and the commission makes those decisions in rate cases when they're deciding how much to increase that by. So what happens when you form a municipal utility is that, in general, you would serve within the community. Now, a lot of municipal utilities serve certain areas outside, or maybe there's certain areas inside that they don't, but in general, the municipal utility would serve the city of Decorah. And so what you're going to acquire from Alliant is the facilities in Decorah, substations, distribution lines, the transformers outside your homes and businesses, those kinds of things. You acquire that which is in place today, essentially you buy it from them and then operate the municipal utility utilizing the same facilities that Alliant utilizes today. Does that help?
It does. So it would be yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
All right, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll mic because my voice is. Martha, are you getting at the question that folks who are served by Alliant in our area are slightly different than the folks who can vote in March 4th? And the question about where
Not
the
at all,
utility
not at all.
providers are?
I'm just trying to get my head around, because I haven't really thought that much about how it happens, and Alliant is so big, and just trying to get a handle on what literally it would be that Decorah would be handling.
Yeah,
if they
sure.
required it.
Yeah, so I think that the thing that I would propose, right, and that we discuss at Decorah Power is that we don't have enough accurate information right now in order to answer all of the detailed questions. So we know things like how has the IUC made decisions in past territory changes. We have historical knowledge, and we try to glean as much as we can. The details would come between a feasibility study and a business plan for the city of Decorah. And so if we vote yes on March 4th, if that passes, the city can request more information from the IUC. That is information we would need to get a far more accurate feasibility study than any of us have ever seen in Decorah in 2018 or now. At which point, maybe we find out this isn't feasible. Like, the math at that point, it might just end, in which case the city of Decorah is a municipal electric utility on paper, right? As we are currently a telecommunications utility on paper, right? Just a point of fact, there's a paper and a filing cabinet at City Hall that says that right now. And after March 4th, there could be one that says we're an MEU. If that feasibility study looks promising, like we might be able to set rates as an MEU that are lower than Alliant, and we have an idea about how to be as reliable, if not more reliable, we would make a business plan. And at that point, some of these questions that we have would be answered, right? Because the city would have to say, what would our rate classes need to be? And what would those rates have to be set at in order for us to be able to purchase this infrastructure at a price we have now, to manage a debt service that we would have to be paying back, right? And to ensure that we have the capacity to provide reliable service. Questions about what we're buying, at that point, we would be pitching to the IUC, we think we need to buy X. And so one of the complications for our territory, right, is that the city of Decorah has some folks, businesses and residential, served by My Energy, and we have some folks that are served by Alliant who live just outside of our city limits. I am not the energy person, right? So my lay person understanding of that is, there's a substation which serves all of the Alliant territory. Substations are expensive, I would imagine.
Yes, they are.
And if Decorah were to say, IUC, we would like to only serve our customers in our city limits with that substation, the larger state would go, well, now we've got some people over here, we've got some people over here who are served by Alliant without a substation. What history tells us is that IUC thinks that's inefficient. I mean, I think that's inefficient too, and I don't know how much a substation costs. So at that point, if a business plan, Decorah with electric engineers and utility experts would say, probably the most efficient way to do this is to either offer to buy the infrastructure of the whole territory, right? Or not, because we learned something. We get that this is super complicated, right? It is very complicated. We can't answer all of the individual questions because we don't have factual information right now. We have a couple of feasibility studies that Dave is doing a really good job of raising questions about. And so we have an election to vote yes to become an electric utility on paper that gives us a seat at the table with the IUC to access the information we need to answer your questions. And I use we in the royal, like, I love Decorah and all the citizens in it, we in that statement.
And in fact, to her statement there, back in 2018, we went on the assumption that none of the co-op service charters, but all of the Alliant served folks, including some outside the city, that it made the most sense for the new municipal utility to serve that from a public interest perspective. In fact, one of the public meetings that I did was actually in an outside the city service area to people who technically didn't get to vote last time. They weren't within the city limits, but we were still there explaining to them what the process looked like and what our assumption was at that time. Yes?
Dave, have you had a chance to look at Alliant's most recent feasibility study, and if so, was there anything that popped out at you?
Well, I mean, I read through it. One of the ways I would describe it is that there's a lot of detail with no detail. Just because I have a whole bunch of numbers on a page doesn't necessarily mean that they're accurate, that they make sense. When you look at the difference between what they've got in this one and what the feasibility study I worked on in particular last time, you would say, well, both of those numbers must be crazy because one is, sort of way too low, and one is really, really, really high. I can't make sense of how they got to the number that they got to. It's sort of like in analysis and in negotiations, when you're on the high side, the sky is the limit. You have everything from reasonable to infinity as your possible answers. When you're on the reasonable side, your sort of bandwidth is much narrower. It's kind of like when you're going to buy something from somebody and they say, well, it's 100,000, and you go, I'm thinking it's 10, and then you start this negotiation. Well, there's only so low you can go. They could go, forever up. If I'm Alliant, what do I want in a feasibility study that's going to be shown to the public in advance of a vote? I would want the highest number possible, right? I would want to make it look like this is crazy. The people who are pushing that have lost their minds. And that's, I think, what you've got. And I think that it's serving that purpose. And that would be the way that I would do it if I was Alliant. Oh, here.
So if this happens with a municipality and everything is being run sort of like a local co-op, where would we get our power from?
Well, that's a good question. So his question is, where would you get your power from? Now, most municipal utilities do not own generation. Most municipal utilities do not own transmission. And they don't have any trouble operating, okay? There are several different ways from a generation perspective when you're a smaller utility. One is that you can contract with somebody. There are lots of wholesale providers. Most of my clients are buying their wholesale power from a wholesale entity under a contract. There also is a market. There is a real-time electricity market where the price changes every hour. You can get a portion of it through that. And I know that a lot of folks in Decorah are interested in renewables. There are developers who build solar sites, who build wind sites. I have lots of clients who buy a piece of renewable by buying some solar over here, by buying some wind over here. Transmission is completely taken care of by what's called MISO. It's the Mid-American Independent System Operator. They manage the entire transmission system in the upper Midwest, and you simply pay for the use of it at a standard rate, the same rate that Alliant pays, okay? So really the cost of transmission would be absolutely exactly the same under either Alliant ownership or ownership by a new municipal utility. So, it's a good question because there's no power plants, here in Decorah. You wouldn't be acquiring any power plants, but there is lots of power available in the entire interconnected upper Midwest grid, if you will. Yes?
Yeah, so most of us think that, or Alliant wants us also to think that we get our power from their generation.
Yes.
It can't be if they don't have generation here. It all has to come through transmission system, and that gets fed into the MISO system. So it's kind of an interesting thing that we are actually paying for Alliant's more expensive wind than Mid-America Energy's less expensive wind.
Yes,
and we're getting Alliant electrons.
Well, all right, there's a huge difference between what you pay for and the electrons that you get, all right? The funny thing about electrons is they do not know how to read a contract. All right, and the other thing is that they are lazy. They that is the original follow the path of least resistance, okay? Now, in rate regulation, the thing that's funny about that is, yes, okay, every utility has power that they're getting from somewhere out of some kind of mixture of power plants. Think of the grid as a giant swimming pool, okay? Everybody who's going to take power out also has to put power in. But the water that you're pulling out is not the same water that you're putting in. However, the rates that you pay, yes, they are dependent to a certain extent on Alliance power plants. The thing is that, I mentioned that market. One of the funny things about it is, as a power company, if the market is cheaper than to operate your plant, you buy from the market rather than operate your plant. So there's actually, even though Alliant has enough resources to serve all of their load, they aren't necessarily always doing that because it makes more sense to buy it when the market is cheaper than it is to generate it themselves. It's a very complicated, in a way, system. It's an incredible engineering marvel. The fact that from instant to instant to instant, the power system adjusts. You turn a light off, somewhere something does a little bit less. You turn a light on, somewhere something does a little bit more instantaneously. It's an engineering marvel. The reality is that ultimately rates that you pay are based on the cost of whomever is serving you. And so now the costs are based on Alliance costs. If you form a new municipal electric, your rates will be based on the cost of the municipal electric, which will be different. And, ultimately, how different and in what direction, that's to a certain extent, the Iowa Utilities Commission doesn't decide what the rates are, but they decide the compensation to be paid for acquisition of the system, which is a big issue relative to the rates that ultimately you would have. Yes, sir.
First a comment and a question. My comment is I'm concerned that the public, the Decorah citizens, are not sufficiently understanding that their vote is just to allow us to investigate, not to have a municipal, it's what Joanna talked about with the telephone. I'm very concerned that hasn't been well communicated. My question to you is, that I've heard from others, if this MEU is such a great thing, why haven't there been any in, however, 15 minutes, since the 70s?
Yes.
And I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear your.
Well, it's a really good question, and part of the reason is because it's a difficult process, okay? And so a lot of municipalities just decide not to go down that road. The other thing is that a lot of municipalities who are served by non-MEUs aren't necessarily unhappy with their service.
They're not getting ripped
Well,
off like we are.
my rates are okay, my reliability is good, I'm happy with the way it functions. I turn on the light switch and the lights come on 98% of the time, and my bill isn't so bad, so okay. Now, I mentioned I'm working with Slayton, Minnesota, which actually their vote passed last year, and we're moving forward. And they had two problems there. Excel's rates are also quite high in Minnesota, and the reliability was really bad. Right? They felt like they're a small community in southwestern Minnesota, and they felt like they were from an operation and maintenance perspective that they were ignored by Excel. And their reliability of their local system was quite awful. What's interesting is, the minute we started the process in Slayton, the Excel trucks showed up and started replacing hundreds of really awful poles in town. And so to a certain extent, even if it doesn't ultimately go forward, you could argue that it's been a win for the citizens of Slayton because they got Excel's attention, and Excel fixed a festering problem that existed. So, Yes, sir.
So, kind of related to his question, the process itself of the municipalization. So let's just say, for example, we get a yes vote, and then it goes into the whole long, discovery process and data and whatever, and then it gets down to negotiations between the city and Alliant Energy. What is a reasonable cost to buy all this infrastructure? And let's just say Decorah says 40 million, Alliant Energy says 85.6 million. Where does it go from there? How what's the IUC say, and how do we then close that gap to where it becomes reasonable.
Okay, so around that question, now, you can, not necessarily complete municipalizations, but I've been involved in territory piece transfers from one utility to another. And oftentimes, we start out here and here, we negotiate, we end up here, we come to agreement, and all we have to do is submit paperwork to the commission to say, both sides agree, here's what it's gonna be, and usually the commission will go, okay. Now, it would be like, quite frankly, like a lawsuit, all right? Where one side says, we're willing to pay you this much because of the lawsuit, and the other side says, I'm only willing to accept something much higher than that. And so now you can't come to an agreement. Well, the IUC is like the judge. Okay, so you end up at a proceeding before the IUC where Alliant and their experts make their case, and Decorah and its experts make their case, and the IUC, just like they do in a rate case, they listen to the information with their staff, they do some of their analysis, and they ultimately come to a decision and say, well, based on, as the final regulators and the final deciders, this is what we think the number should be, and then that's the number. And then ultimately the city has to decide whether or not they want to move forward based on that result.
Can those decisions or figures be appealed by either side?
Well, I would imagine that yes, they probably can be, can't everything?
Yeah.
But I don't even play an attorney on TV, so I can't really comment too much more on that. Yes, sir.
You raised the other issue, attorneys, you're not an attorney, I'm not an attorney, but why can't Alliant be sued for misrepresenting their rates?
Well, I have no idea.
Seems like
They at least got sort of a verbal smackdown in the 2019 rate case from the Iowa Utilities Commission, which probably, I'm gonna guess, was as far as the IUC could go.
Dave, say a little bit more about why the commission slapped them down. What was it that the company did wrong?
What the company did wrong, all right, and when you read what the commission said, and this isn't just my opinion. What they did wrong was that they were there. They hired Concentric. Concentric made claims about what the rates were gonna do going forward, which I showed you earlier this evening. The company was there, and at that time in the process, the company knew that what Concentric was saying was not reality. Okay, now they could say, well, that rate case, was in 2019, and this all happened in 2018. Companies don't just wake up one morning and say, oh, we gotta file a rate case tomorrow, all right? They know what they're planning to do. They make long-range projections. They have big people on staff, big groups that are constantly looking at rates and figuring out and looking from their own perspective relative to dealing with the commission. What's our process gonna be? How much do we need to ask for? When are we going to do it? And I think what the commission was saying was, listen, in early 2018, you already knew that what Concentric was saying was not correct.
Well, Dave, what I think needs to be added here is that you and other expert witnesses for the Decorah area group, using our non-disclosure agreements and our access to confidential strategic planning documents of Alliant Energy, showed the board definitive proof that the company planned in 2017 to file a rate increase in 2019. And they didn't share that information with Concentric, and they stood right up in front of the Decorah City Council and didn't reveal that information to the City Council either. That is what got steam coming out of the ears of the board chair. That's why the language was so strong.
Yes, sir.
Let's say that there's a purchase price established of $50 million. From what I understand, the financing of that would be paid by the ratepayers in the MEU.
Yeah, the question is around, if there's an acquisition, you have to borrow money to pay for it. And one of the things that people are concerned about is that if the city issues what's called a general obligation bond, which is what they typically do for things like street improvements and things like that, that taxpayers, particularly property taxpayers, could potentially be on the hook for that debt. And that is not how it works, okay? How it works is that utilities, and I've actually worked a lot in my career with utilities that are issuing what are called revenue bonds, okay? A revenue bond is very different than a general obligation bond. Somebody who invests in a revenue bond has no access to property taxes or the city's general fund relative to getting repayment for those bonds. They are completely pledged only against the revenues of the utility. Now, the utility has an obligation from a financial perspective, essentially, to make sure that their rates continue to be high enough to pay back the debt. But let's just say for some reason a municipal utility goes bankrupt. The bondholders have no way of going back to the city in general. They're just out their money. They've made that investment. The entity was not able to pay the bonds, and there you go. And so the general city, the city taxpayers, the property tax rolls, the city general fund, none of that is on the hook for utility revenue bonds. Yes.
So, the purchase price negotiations, the seller can't just say, oh, I think it's worth this. Seems like the utility commission would say, well, let's see what your inventory is. What is this consistent? Your distribution system is what you're buying. So that means it's a bunch of components. And those components are either new or somewhere in a depreciation schedule and written off or on the way to being written off. So the value of an inventory of stuff should be determinable by looking at the inventory status and depreciation schedule.
Yeah. Well, and see, particularly relative to inventory, if you will, for a utility like Alliant, okay, in their rate cases, they have what's called their rate base. And basically rate base is the stuff they own, okay? And most of their rate base is made up of power plants, transmission lines, substation, distribution lines. They get a return on investment for that. So I've invested X million dollars, and so because they're a regulated utility, they keep very good property records, okay? Because they have to prove what their investment is so that when the regulators establish what their return on investment is going to be in figuring out what the rates are going to be, that they know that it's solid information.
So you should be able to take the allowed rate of return on equity and extrapolate backwards from that to come up with what the value that they have determined is their value of their.
But that's not done on a city by city basis. So what you can't glean from that, I can look at their rate case and see what their rate base is, okay? But that's for all of Alliant, Iowa, not just Decorah. So you can't extract the Decorah only information from what's in a rate case, okay? But what I'm saying is that Alliant or Mid-Am or Excel or anybody else, they know.
Yeah, so they would not have a difficult time coming up with the actual value that they have given as a piece of their larger whole.
Yes.
That represents Decorah's segment of the total value that their rate case is based upon.
Yes.
And so it shouldn't be a matter of opinion, it should be a matter of what their records say. And is that what the IUC then would demand?
Yes, they would have to, I mean, that would be part of what the data request and so on is. What is the value of the facilities in Decorah? That would be a key component, yes.
So the number that we're being given, that increased 82% in the last 5 years in the, whatever it costs to purchase, should reveal how that 82% increase in value has occurred.
Yes. But all we know right now is what is on the page of the report.
So we should be seeing some really gold-plated transformers out here, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
So, if Decorah Power was a municipality, and there's a derecho that came through, and I mean, we had just thousands of cables everywhere, just willy-nilly. There's a cooperation contract, isn't there, between all other
Yes.
cooperatives and all the different power companies to come to the rescue and drop what you're doing and help out?
Yeah, the question is, what happens if there's a horrible event, big ice storm, tornado that comes through, whatever, and wipes out a lot of the infrastructure. And within the particular, well, and actually even the investor-owned utilities, okay? In the utility world, particularly the folks who are out working in the field, they don't care if I'm a municipal or if I'm a co-op or if I'm an investor-owned utility. What happens when there's a significant outage, like let's say in Florida when there's been hurricanes, there are crews from all over the country, from all different kinds of utilities who go down there to help. It's called mutual aid. And there's agreements amongst all of the municipals in the state of Iowa. And when there's a problem and it's like, well, I got a staff of 3, right? There are small municipal utilities, with literally 3 people on staff, all right? They can't do that. But their friends, their neighbors, they come to their rescue and help them to restore power in the case of things like that happening. Even Alliant, if they had something huge happen, they would not have the crews if they had a big widespread problem, let's say from a huge ice storm, and there would be other entities who would come and help them as well.
Well, even last week, Don said that they sent part of their crew over to Cedar Rapids when the derecho hit over there.
Yeah.
Out of line.
Well, that actually happens all the time.
Yeah.
I had a lot of clients who sent crews to California, who sent crews to Florida, who sent crews to North Carolina. Yes?
How easy is it to rent a substation, portable substation, to serve your community in a day or two?
So the question is, how easy it is to rent a portable substation? I'm gonna have to give that a big depends, all right? It's not like there's a lot of them out there, and they have to be specific relative to voltage, and they have to be available, and sometimes when that happens, can be relatively quick, and other times it is not. However, substations are usually not the problem. All right, when there's a significant weather event, what is it usually? It's the lines running around the neighborhood or around the businesses. If there's an ice storm, those kinds of things. It usually, when you look at a substation, it's primarily a big, huge piece of metal, the transformer. And so that's the real issue, and those, unless there's some sort of a direct hit there, sometimes substations can fail on their own, right? It's rare. They're a pretty reliable piece of equipment, but generally, weather doesn't impact those as much as it impacts the infrastructure of delivering from the substation to the homes and businesses.
Or transmission.
Well, transmission is a whole nother ballgame, and
I
actually,
mean, that's what our case here. It was the transmission that failed.
yes, and transmission is an interesting thing because and I mentioned MISO, they sort of manage the transmission system, but individual utilities like Alliant or others, own transmission. But if you had a municipal utility, the transmission provided to the community would not change. You wouldn't own the transmission, okay? So the same people who own it now would own it then.
ITC.
Yes, well, and it just varies all over the place, yeah. Yes, sir.
Don't wanna keep you forever, but, the whole issue of power lines being down, recently Alliant invested, I assume, a lot of money to put some lines underground up to the college, and I'm wondering how much that influences the economic equation.
Well, it certainly would, they've made an investment, and so that would be in their investment and would be part of what you're paying for. I know of municipal utilities who converted their entire overhead system to underground themselves. because from a reliability perspective, there's sort of give and take in all of these things. You know, I can tell you that my home, I take advantage of the fact that I am underground all the way from the substation to my home. And if my experience is anything, I've had a total of 2.5 hours of outages in 37 years. And 2 hours and 20 minutes of that was one event.
And of course, you kept track of those numbers.
Yeah, well, I'm an unabashed utility geek, so, there's a lot of things that I keep track of that most people think is really stupid.
We're happy for that.
One thing, I haven't heard about is profit. Alliant is investor owned.
Yes.
And MEU would be what? Not profit.
Okay, profit is an interesting word, okay. So yes, investor-owned utilities, they're owned by investors, right? So people buy Alliant stock on the stock market, and they're expecting the stock price to, they get dividends, they hope the share price goes up, they're making an investment. And when I talk about that return on equity for Alliant, that is their profit. Now, when you talk about municipal and cooperative, a lot of folks will use the word nonprofit. I struggle a little bit with the term, because you still have to have a margin, okay? You can't run along and have your bottom line be zero all the time. So all utilities have a positive bottom line, some kind of a margin. The difference is that consumer-owned utilities like municipals and cooperatives, what they typically do with that money is they reinvest it in the system, because they don't have shareholders to give the margin to, okay? And so that money is basically kept within the utility. You have to have a certain amount of reserves, you just do. You make ongoing capital improvements, right? So a lot of times that's where the margin goes, it gets reinvested in the system, because there are no investors to write a check to send a dividend to support a share price on their behalf.
Thank you, Dave.
All right.
Thank you for once again proving me right that we are nerdy about electric utilities in Decorah. Dave, thank you so much for coming and spending your time with us and answering all of our questions. We appreciate it. For those of you in the room, if you have more questions, if you want to get engaged with Decorah Power, we're on the social medias, and our website is decorahlocalpower.org. But there's some information in a sign-up sheet outside this door. Please take stickers and buttons with you as you go. We have a couple more yard signs if anyone would be interested. And most importantly, will you please go and vote and take the eligible voters in your house along with you, and maybe your neighbors next door and your friends across
All
town.
we need is 3 votes.
Got it, Uva. All right, thank you all.
You
Yes.
said you're recording this, will that be on your website?
Yep, so if you missed last week's session with Don-Com, that is live on our YouTube page and linked on our Facebook page right now. This was live streamed on Facebook until my iPad died. So if you want to go home tonight and watch the first 45 minutes, go for it, it's there. But the full recording will be on in the next couple of days. We will have another educational event next Tuesday night, same time, different place. So if you could hang out or pay attention to news and our email, we'll get you information about that. Thank you. And thank you, yes, to Kristen for graphic recording this meeting.
That is the fanciest notes I have ever seen. I mean, it really is something.
We appreciate her. All right, thank you all. Have a good night. Stay warm.